Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Letting Go of Her podcast. Um, so, before we get started, I do have to say that yes, I do have permission to share this story. It's not necessarily my own, but it is a part of my life. um, and I did ask my husband prior to recording this episode if I could share, kind of a little bit of his testimony, but sort of from like my point of view. And he said, yeah, go for it. My previous podcast, I did talk about this before, and I even had my husband on my podcast, the previous one, not in any of these episodes. I don't know if I can get him on any of these, but I do have his permission, and I did want to record this episode this week because today, the day that I am recording, is my husband's 4 year sober anniversary. And it's also his 4 year anniversary of giving his life to Jesus. My husband and I met right before my 22nd birthday. Um, and we met at work. We both worked at LA Fitness. At the time, I was front desk and he was a weekend sales manager. And when we met, I transferred to that location because I had the opportunity to move out with a roommate. And so I took it and I did. Um, and this was when I was like ending my previous relationship because it was just long distance and it just wasn't going to work out. I was working a lot because I had to pay rent and I had to pay bills. And I was working on the weekends and it just yeah, it I'm not gonna get into details, but it just would not have worked out for me to be driving back and forth. And my husband at the time was getting out of his own relationship. Um, and so we started hanging out like just as friends. Like he knew that I had just moved out there and I didn't have any friends, and so he would invite me to go out with his friends. And yeah, so it started off as just like us hanging out with like group of friends and stuff, and then it just sort of slowly started developing into something more. And we kind of started dating. I guess you can call it that. Um, just hanging out, just more, us together. And we met in December of 2012. I went to go and do just like a closing shift before I officially transferred in January of 2013. Um, we started dating, I guess, technically in like June of 2013. And then we were engaged by December of 2013 and officially married by April of 2014. So sure, things kind of kind of went a little fast, but as cliche as it sounds, and when people say like when you know, and it was just one of those things where we just knew. Like our relationship has never been easy, but it's always been effortless. And I want to say that I've mentioned this before. But things took a huge and massive turn throughout the last like 10 years of our marriage. And honestly, the only way that we were able to combat that was through Jesus. So when we were dating and like hanging out with friends, all we would do was party, drink, clubbing, bars. We were young. We were young and dumb. And that was what we were doing. So like our whole just like relationship was based off of that, right? And I never really thought of it in any other way because we were just young and we were drinking and everyone was drinking. And some days someone would get belligerently drunk and some days someone else would, and so to me it was just like normal. Like it was just, this is what people or young adults do at this age, right? Like you drink and drink and drink every weekend and then you wake up hungover the next day and go to work regardless. So after we got married, I want to say like 2 months after, my husband was fired from his job. And this was a little bit scary because we had just gotten an apartment together. And so now we had like rent to pay. And he had just bought me a brand new car. He bought me a car as like a gift, like a wedding gift. And so we had a car payment. And just based off the money that I was making on my own, we would not have been able to survive. So I was working at the gym limited hours, and then I got a job at a cafe that I would work in the mornings, and then at a restaurant that I would work at night. So I was trying to juggle three jobs all at the same time. Um, and my husband was kind of trying to figure out things to do within the months of him leading up to him finding a job. And we were living in LA. So at around September was when he found a job out in Palmdale. And that meant that he would have to stay out there and I would have to stay out in LA because we had the lease, we had signed the lease, and there was no way that we were able to afford like cutting the lease. And him being out here, he was sleeping at a friend's house. So like it's not like I could come with him and because he didn't even have a place to stay, right? Like he would sleep on the couch of his friend's house. Um so he would drive down to see me about like twice a week. Um and yeah, once the lease was over, I moved in with my grandparents because again, we still didn't have a place to stay out here in Palmdale. He was still with his friend. We were trying to, pay off debt and trying to save up money to be able to buy a home, like put a down payment for a home because he was like, I'm not renting, I am buying. If we're gonna, he's like, if I'm gonna move you up here, like it's because we're gonna be buying a house. So for almost 2 full years of our marriage, the first 2 years of our marriage, we didn't live with each other. It was around, let's see, November-ish of 2015 that we were finally able to start looking for houses. It might have been like October. We finally had enough like saved up for down payment and debt was, at a good place. So we started house searching, and by December we found a house that we really liked, and so we went into escrow. um, and I remember telling my grandparents like, oh hey, you guys want to see what my husband got me for Christmas? He bought me a house. um, and so we moved into our home out here in January of 2016. And then that April of 2016 was when we had our second year wedding anniversary. So that entire time we did not live with each other. And honestly, like sometimes I have had to grieve those like first 2 years of our marriage because I feel that like we didn't have like that quote unquote like honeymoon bliss, right? Like we didn't have that stage where like everything was good and we didn't know still much about each other and the way we lived and stuff like that. I felt that like for the first 2 years it was just a lot of stress because we weren't together, right? We weren't together, and he was always working, I was always working, and then the times that we did spend time together we were just so exhausted. So yeah, I felt that like we missed out a little bit on 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 that honeymoon bliss because we were just always so stressed out, and it was always like arguments over like money, right? And sure, you can say like, well, if you had this conversation before marriage, right? Which sure, yeah, we could have, but I don't think that would have prevented what actually happened, right? And it's one of those things where like, yeah, you can talk about scenarios and what would happen, but like you never really know how you're going to react until you're actually in it. And I don't think either one of us expected for him to get fired 2 months after we got married. So we finally, lived together. And then I started working at the gym that he was working at out here. And yeah, I know that might sound weird, but for like the first, what was it, up until my daughter was born, we've always worked together. We've always worked like, yeah, at the same place. But we've always been able to keep a really professional relationship at work. We never really brought home work and we never really brought work home. And it worked. It worked for us. I know that some marriages, it doesn't really work well when you're working with your spouse or have to work together. But for us, it did work well. He wasn't directly like my boss, or he wasn't directly like involved with what I was doing. Like he did sales, I did personal training. So like we never really crossed paths unless there was some sort of like team meeting or something. So I never really got in his way, he never really got in mine, and we just worked really well together. So after buying our home, or finally moving into our home in January of 2016, in November of 2016, we found out that he was going to get promoted and he had to move to Ridgecrest. California, which is another hour and a half away from where we live now, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And they gave him 1 week to find some place to move, which coincidentally that week or weekend was Thanksgiving weekend. So a lot of like renting houses and stuff like were closed. So he had about a week to find a new place to live because he had to start at that new location on December 1st. So he found just a little apartment, and on December 1st, he left and stayed in Ridgecrest, sleeping like, I don't know if he got like an air mattress or would just sleep on the floor with like blankets and stuff because all of our stuff was still in the house and we didn't really have much time to pack and to move. And also, I wasn't allowed to transfer locations until January 1st, because they needed to find a replacement for me and I needed to train the other trainer and, tell my clients that I was moving and stuff. And so, yeah, so after not living together for almost 2 years, um, and then finally living together for like what, like 10 ish months, then he had to leave. And then I couldn't leave until a month later after that. And Ridgecrest was fun. There wasn't much to do there. All there really is for, I guess, like a nightlife or like a social life is to drink. There are a ton of bars out there. um so a lot of the scene that we did was just drinking, right? And that's all we did. And then by our third wedding anniversary, I decided, I was like, you know what? Like let's settle down, right? Like it to us it seemed like we were going to be there for a few years. And so we were like, we like this place, it's nice and quiet, like it's a good place to like raise a family. So we decided like, hey, let's try to have a baby. And 9 months and 1 day after our anniversary, my daughter was born. But before that, though, when I was about 32, 33 weeks pregnant, we found out that he was potentially going to be fired again. What happened was that the company decided to change its rules, and they decided that there was not going to allow any spouses to be working in the same location with each other, when one was the manager of another. And my husband prior to that wasn't my direct manager. I didn't have to respond to him, but because of the changes in the company at this point I would have to respond to him. And so they didn't want spouses working with one another because they didn't want any sort of like favoritism to happen. But they couldn't fire me because I was pregnant. So I was protected. Um, so they decided, all right, well, then we're going to fire him instead. This caused a huge, huge, huge stress, chaotic level. Not only that, after we found out that I was pregnant, my husband decided like, okay, since we're gonna have a baby here and we're planning on staying here for a few years, like let's buy a house. So I was pregnant in April, or I guess May, and then in July we purchased a home in Ridgecrest. And by November we found out that he was going to get fired when I was about 2 months out from giving birth. And we're in the city where we don't know anyone or anything. And it became very, very stressful. And this was when I started to notice my husband's alcohol drinking, just getting a little bit out of the ordinary and a little bit out of control. I think that for a while I just kind of dismissed it as is like, oh, he's just stressed out, right? Or like, oh, he's always drank, right? Like he's always had some beers and at night, or he's always had this and stuff. So like I never really thought much of it. And it wasn't until I started noticing that he was hiding how much he was drinking from me that I realized that it had become a problem. So from what I could see, he would bring home like a 6 pack of beer, right? But from what he was hiding, I would find in the garage like bottles and cans of other stuff that he would like drive home, chug in the car before, in the garage before coming into the house with what I thought he had only bought, but had already like proceeded to drink prior to that, right? And it was endless, endless arguments. And sometimes I do feel guilty that I didn't try more, or that I didn't do more to stop him or to help him see. Even though we would argue, he would always just say, like, you're just nagging, like, you're just nagging me, right? Um, but while I was pregnant with my daughter, I fell into perinatal depression, which is when you become depressed when you're pregnant. And I had my own, I was fighting my own battles, right? And I felt like there were times where I just felt guilty because I was so just like in tune with my own struggle and fighting my own demons that I didn't realize and see that my husband was also fighting his own. And for a while, like, I struggled with just like, did I do enough for him, or could I have helped him more? And now when I look back at it, I realize, like, you can't make people change, right? And you can't make people see their own faults and their own flaws. So I feel that, like, no matter if I like tried to push more or tried to make him stop, he never would have changed. Like, that would have been something that he would have had to decide on his own. And I don't think that at that point, at that time, he was ready to see that. So my daughter was born. And when my husband came back from leave, like, yes, he was fired. And I want to say, like, a month after that, he found a job back to where we had first originally bought our house. And for like a few months, I think he was commuting back and forth, and I had gone back to work. And I was working in the afternoons when he'd come home, and he would watch the baby for me. But then it got too crazy, and he would sometimes never make it home on time. So that meant that I had to cancel my clients, or that I would be late. And we decided, you know what, like, you're just, for me, like, you're just gonna stop working, and like, we're just gonna focus on him working. Um After a while, though, like, just the commuting back and forth became too much. So we decided, you know what, like, let's just move back to our old home. We had been renting this home, and we were like, we can just rent the new one and move back to our old one, and that way he would only have like a 5-minute commute from that point on. And so when we moved back into our home, we had rented it out to friends, previous coworkers of ours. And, because they were people that we knew and people that we worked with, I assumed that they would have taken good care of my home. But it wasn't until we moved in that we realized just the disaster, just how badly they had damaged our home. So it took us a few years to be able to pay and redo the house that they had damaged. Just this last year, we finally were able to get our kitchen redone, because there were handles missing, you know, drawers that were broken, microwaves that were broken, like, just stuff that we were like, okay, you know what, like, we can live with it for now, but like, eventually we're gonna need to redo this whole thing, because it just kept like getting worse and worse as time went on. And doing kitchens are expensive. So we had to wait to the point where we were a good financially stable, um to yeah, be able to afford, getting our kitchen redone. But anyways, when we moved back into this house, um he started hanging out with his new coworkers and stuff, and we would go out. And this is when I started to realize, like, oh man, like, all these guys do is drink on the weekends. um and I have a baby, like, I have a kid. And this is just not the environment that I want her to grow up in. And again, the endless arguments over how much he was drinking, and how he would act towards us. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into detail over the things, because I feel that it took me a really long time to forgive my husband. And I don't want to kind of reopen that wound. But it was just endless arguments. And so we had come up with a quote unquote solution where it was like, he was only allowed to drink Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and only a 6-pack of beer. My husband, very smart man, he would make sure that he purposely would not eat all day long so that the alcohol could hit him harder, right? Um, and then he would get the highest percentage of alcohol beer that was available, which then, would cause him to be drunk. Um, and yeah, I would be an anxious wreck every weekend. Like Monday through Thursday, I could handle it. But when Friday came, um, I didn't know how my husband would be that weekend drunk. Some days he would be like the funny drunk, right? And then other days he would be the mean, the rude, the passive aggressive, um, almost emotionally like abusive drunk. And there were many times where I would hide in my daughter's room while she'd be sleeping, because in my head it was like, okay, I'm safe here. He wouldn't say or do anything if I'm right by my daughter. Like he wouldn't do that to her. And I remember one night the argument got really, 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 really bad, where even the word divorce was thrown around a few times. And I remember laying in my daughter's little bed in her room with her, just crying, and I was on my phone looking for jobs, because I was like, I know this is the end. Like I know that this is the end of our marriage. I can't deal with this. Um I don't want my daughter growing up this way. Like in my head I was like, I'm gonna figure it out. Like I was texting friends that I knew that had, different jobs, and just kind of like, hey, like, can you somehow find me an interview or something? Like that's how bad the argument was, and that's how I just I felt. I was like, there's no way that my marriage is surviving this. And I was just crying and crying, and I remember just like calling out to God and being like, God, like I I know this I know this isn't the life that you've wanted for me. Like maybe I made a few mistakes here and there. But I know that this isn't what you want for me. Like, and so I would, pray and be like, please let my husband see the damage that he is doing, but not like the damage that he's doing to me. Like I can survive. I can get over this. I'm like, but the damage that he's going to do to his daughter, like, does he really want his daughter to grow up one day and marry someone like him? And I just prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. Then I remember he went out to do some work stuff. And I remember getting a phone call in the morning, and he just said, I need you to find me an AA meeting. And I was like, okay. I quickly went on the computer and I searched for AA meetings in our location. And he was on his way home. And I found like the earliest meeting that they had, and he was gonna get home by like 2:30, and I think by like 3:30 or 4 was like the first meeting. So as soon as he got home, I just made him hop into my car, and I was like, okay, we're going. And he's like, where, like, what, where are we going? And I'm like, to your AA meeting, right? And he was a little bit shocked. Like I don't think that he thought that I would actually find him one, or two, I don't think that he thought that I would find him one that quickly. um and I was like, all right, let's go. And so we went, and I dropped him off, and I just kind of sat there outside of it. And I remember just praying to God, like, God, like, please, like, I pray that this helps him change. Like I pray that this helps him see what he's been doing. And that was the day that my husband gave his life to Jesus over at that AA meeting. Um, and I remember for the next couple of days, he was just an emotional wreck. Like, I think just in that moment, it was just the Holy Spirit convicting him of everything he had done. Um, and I remember him just like calling everyone that he knew, just asking for apology or asking for forgiveness, and just, you know, um, yeah, just feeling guilty over, I guess, how he had treated people while he was under the influence and stuff. And I remember him having that conversation with me too, and my heart at that point was just hardened. Um, I was grateful that he was sober or beginning his sobriety journey. Um, and I was grateful that he had found God, but at the same time, I was angry. I was so angry because I'm like, how can you so quickly just switch over? It was almost like I couldn't believe it. Like in my head, it was like, okay, how long is this going to last, right? Because he had tried and attempted to stop drinking before, and it would last, I don't know, a few weeks. And I was angry, but I think mainly I was just scared. I was scared that that wasn't going to be the end of it. I was scared that it was some sort of like facade, like he was doing it just to like, shut me up almost. Um, and that he wasn't really truly like changed. And that terrified me. And as time went on, very slowly, he just proved to me more and more and more that he was a changed man. Um, and I I struggled a lot with forgiving him for years. um, it it was really hard for me, like I said, to just accept that in just like an instant he just changed and he was good now. Um, a little bit of me felt like, why didn't you change before? And why didn't you change for me? Why didn't you change the moment you had your daughter? Um, like, why did it have to get to this point? Like, why did you have to go to an AA meeting, right? In order to change and in order for you to see the wrong and the damage and everything that you were doing. Um, and then I was angry because it had taken him so long, right? And I'm like, you just wasted 6 years of our marriage, right? Like, just like we could have had 6 great years of our marriage, but the whole time I'm just an anxious wreck over how much are you going to drink and which person am I going to get from you today. And it was hard. And I think that at that point, like I really had to pray and just be like, God, help soften my heart towards this man. Like, you gave me this man and you had me marry this man for a reason. Like, help me. um because at that point, I couldn't believe him. But here we are 4 years later. And yes, in an instant my husband did change. In an instant my husband decided, I'm never drinking again. In an instant my husband decided, like, I'm never treating you that way ever again. um and I know that it doesn't it doesn't necessarily happen that way for a lot of people. um and for a while I did fear that he would relapse and he would go back. But that was, my own insecurities that I needed to work on. um and I realized that all the years that my husband struggled, it was his own trauma, his own demons, his own things that he had to work on. And no matter what I said or did, like, nothing would have made him change. The only person who could have made him change was Jesus, and he did. um and I went through that world where it was like, well, why did you change for Jesus and not change for me, right? But what, like, a selfish an ignorant way to think, right? I wanted to be the hero in this story, and I wasn't. But my husband always says, he's like, you were the hero because you were the one who prayed, and you were the one who never stopped praying for me. So it's been 4 years, 4 years now, that honestly, um, that I got the man that I fell in love with back. Um, because it was a huge struggle, just watching him go through that. um it felt so helpless. Like, i I wanted to just scream on his face and slap some sense into him and just be like, you see what you're doing, right? um And I am also very grateful that he decided to get sober when my daughter was still really young. And I pray and I hope that she doesn't remember um, the arguments that her and her dad would, you know, we would have. Um, but that now that my kids get to grow up with a loving father and they get to grow up with a sober father and they get to grow up with a God fearing father also. He's not the perfect man, but nor am I. I'm not the perfect woman. Um, but the Lord put us together for a reason, and I cannot be more grateful for that. He's always been an extremely, extremely hardworking man, um, and has always given us absolutely everything. Um, and I can see how much he loves the kids, and my prayer is just for him to know how much we love him and how much we appreciate him. Um, and I hope and pray that I know he's tired. I know he's working endlessly and he's going to school and our schedules are just crazy and he's exhausted, exhausted. So if anyone out there can pray for my husband, the season of life that we are in and the season of life that we've been in for the last 5 years, um, or almost 5 years, sorry. It's been pretty crazy and chaotic, but we would not be able to get through this without God. And God has always been there for us. But I do, pray for anyone out there who maybe your husband is not dealing with alcoholism, maybe some different substance abuse, or maybe it's just a non believer. Never stop praying for your husband, um, because the Lord can help and the Lord can change hearts. Um, so never, ever, 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 ever stop praying. Today, I am learning to let go of that guilt of thinking that I could have done more or should have done more. But also, I am learning to get rid of that pride that I wanted to be the hero, but I was never meant to be the hero. Only Jesus was. So I thank him every day for giving me back the man that I fell in love with because I am a new creation.